On October 22nd, 2024, Blizzard celebrated an impressive anniversary, 20 years of World of Warcraft. And with that celebration came a huge announcement. Oops, sorry, wrong announcement.
We are so pleased to announce that we are bringing you the Classic experience.
The announced release of World of Warcraft Classic for me is a frustrating one. It feels like we're giving Blizzard a pat on the back and a good job, sport, for creating a solution to a problem that they themselves created. We're supposed to be excited for what? A game that's already came out 5 years ago? The continued rehashing of World of Warcraft at this point is soulless and sad. And I just wish Blizzard would make a good predecessor to World of Warcraft in the form of WoW 2 or WoW Classic Plus. The recent direction Blizzard has taken with Classic Fresh just feels like an extension of the laziness we've seen from them over the years. And that's especially true pertaining to their handling of World of Warcraft Classic and the now countless subgenres it's seen over the years. Is anyone else tired of this? Does anyone else just want Blizzard to make a good version of the game? Instead, they're choosing to milk nostalgia and trade the reputation that they have built over decades of high quality, innovative games for an easy buck. I want to explain what I mean by that, but first, let me walk you through some background. If you've ever played Vanilla WoW, or if you played the 2019 retake on that experience as World of Warcraft Classic, you likely have an understanding of what it means to experience a vintage version of World of Warcraft. It looks like limited classes with a specific and realized class fantasy. It looks like an open-ended adventure in a harsh world where the player isn't exactly the savior of the universe. You're just a person in it. It's simple but fulfilling, and the engaging systems in the game reward you for, well, playing the game. But above all, it's adventure and community that make this world. And in many people's minds, that vintage WoW experience that I just described is synonymous with the first 3 expansions of the series: World of Warcraft Vanilla, The Burning Crusade, and Wrath of the Lich King. And the general consensus is after that, the games start going downhill. Before we had that classic WoW experiment in 2019, that by the way is still continuing to this day, players often consider those original 3 expansions to adhere to the defining elements of the vintage WoW era. However, as that classic project progressed through Vanilla and to Wrath of the Lich King, it became increasingly clear that Vanilla and TBC truly are set apart as a good representation of a classic experience of World of Warcraft. As you move into Wrath of the Lich King, and particularly the later stages of that expansion, the game starts to drift away from what most players would perceive as classic. Even at its foundation, Wrath, while undeniably fun and the population peak of the game, it begins to depart from the essence of the original classic experience. And there's many different ways we see that. We see that in the looks of the game, for example. We see that in the multi-tiered raid difficulties that begin here. Difficulty that begins to stratify reward structures in the game, furthering the gap between good and bad players. We also see it in the form of abandonment of lower level open world content. Systems were implemented to streamline leveling in the form of the first ever bound to account items. These items boost your base experience, letting you skip almost half the game, that is, leveling up. There's also the problem of new expansion zones that isolate the highest level players to that respective expansion's area, leaving the leveling world feeling empty and smaller than ever. Not only that, but in Wrath of the Lich King we also see the shift in the idea of what is in-game content for players. Blizzard during this expansion has a big push focusing on raids as end-all be-all in-game content for players. And lastly, the vibe check of Wrath of the Lich King the second time around just didn't quite hold up to either of the previous expansions. It didn't feel like classic anymore. And as it turns out, Wrath of the Lich King marks for me the threshold where World of Warcraft begins to evolve from the old game into the new game. And if Wrath is the subtle transition, Cataclysm is the complete flip of the switch. The world, the vibe, the mechanics, there's no way this game is the same game as this. And the numbers actually bear this out. If you compare the player base of Vanilla, TBC, and Wrath of the Lich King to Cataclysm, for example, the drop-off in player engagement is significant. This decline shows that players are not as invested in the classic project as it ventures further into expansions that feel more aligned with the modern version of the game. So it feels kind of weird to keep calling a game Classic World of Warcraft when it doesn't feel classic anymore. It's just the next stop on this train that frankly not a lot of people want to be on. The reason I bring this up is because when a development company is trying to determine its direction for a game, it's essential to consider what the game is and what the game is meant to be. What the game is sort of the nuts and bolts of the game. However, what the game is meant to be comes to fruition through the form of players engaging in that game and the result of that interaction. In Blizzard's case, their decision to simply re-release the same expansions in the same order, one after another, feels increasingly disconnected from the essence of what they claim to be creating, which allegedly is a classic experience, a recreation of the vintage experience that the original games produced back in the day.
We're committed to making an authentic classic experience. We want to reproduce the game experience that we all enjoyed from the original classic WoW, not the actual launch experience.
However, we know now that the vintage experience of World of Warcraft cannot be achieved by simply just re-releasing the game as it was back in the day. And honestly, it never could have been. We know that because those who played vanilla WoW when it originally launched can attest that WoW Classic is roughly the same game in terms of content and design. Due to Blizzard's no changes philosophy, the way it's played today is fundamentally different. Gaming and the way people play have evolved dramatically. These days, players focus on figuring out the most efficient ways to win, and they're much more skilled and knowledgeable about just how games work in general. They are goal-orientated and focused. And because Blizzard has already given players an official version of Classic in 2019, we know how specifically World of Warcraft Vanilla is different now than it was back in the early 2000s. Just to name some major differences: raiding, the economy, engagement, and culture are all extremely different and make the game today a completely different experience. Raiding is a main pillar of in-game content. It is designed as the final challenge for players in regards to in-game difficulty, and back in the day, that's exactly what it was. In the original version of the game, Cthulhu, the last boss in NQ40, lived for 113 days before he was defeated. In the Burning Crusade, Kael'thas from Tempest Keep lived 130 days before being defeated, and in Wrath of the Lich King, Heroic Lich King lived for 46 days before finally being taken out. However, in the classic versions of the game, these bosses were all defeated within 2 hours of the raid release. As a matter of fact, every single raid to have ever been released in Classic through to Wrath of the Lich King were completely cleared first day with 0 wipes from the teams that cleared first. Sometimes this was done even within the hour of release. Talk about a big difference in skill and knowledge. Because these fights are all solved, the mechanics are all known, and the optimization is complete, before players even enter the raid, they already know the exact best team comps to take in for the raid, and even have special add-ons that are already preloaded with all the directions to kill each boss. Raiding in Classic becomes a game of seconds, where most boss fights last under a minute, and everything is completely solved. With the challenge gone, and every single micro decision already accounted for, it leads to one of the biggest problems in Classic: culture. Because the game has existed for 20 years, and there is a guide for absolutely everything, the endgame is completely solved, and advanced combat logs exist in the game, players have developed what you can call a culture of min-maxing. In raids, guilds and pugs alike force players to play the most optimal classes, the most optimal specializations, use the most optimal consumables, and play in the most optimal way possible. Going outside of what is best is often, to say lightly, frowned upon. Players min-max the game not because it's hard, they do it because they want to see this number go up on a third-party platform, and they've been told by the culture of the WoW community that they need to adhere to these soft rules of the game. Because of this, thousands of players that either don't have as much experience with the game or want to choose to play a suboptimal class, they've been pushed out of the community. And while there was always a min-maxing culture, that culture used to be limited to higher tiers of gameplay. But in the modern era, that mindset has spread to even casual players of the game. And because of that, a lot of people have just left the game because they don't want to deal with it. One of the things that makes WoW special is the time it takes to do things. It's a good and a bad thing. The current time to level in WoW Classic Vanilla is estimated to be anywhere between 120 to 300 hours for a casual player. After you level up, you need to grind gear, complete prerequisites to enter the raids, maybe level up your professions, and acquire the gold it takes to complete all of the above. There's almost no way to quantify the time it takes to do this, but if you were doing it at maximum efficiency, it probably takes you somewhere between 120 to 300 hours if you're a new player. Then after you complete all of this, you can pretty much do any content you want, but most players will also partake in the raiding scene. which will require you to partake in additional time sinks. Acquiring all the world buffs for the raid requires you to fly around the world for maybe an hour or two alone each week. Maybe you have to prep consumables or farm for them. And then there's the act of actually raiding, which likely you were cutting out 2 to 4 hours at least one day a week to raid. Maybe even 2 days a week if you're doing multiple raids or have multiple characters. My point by going through all of this is if you play this game, you are not jumping on for 30 minutes then getting off. You are playing for hours because this game requires an extreme amount of time to do just about anything. And while the game has always been this way, I think people in the modern era value time differently than they did back in the early 2000s. Time nowadays to almost anyone has some sort of monetary attachment to it. The question of farming gold or leveling up a new character is not a proposition of fun or achievement. It's often one of a monetary value proposition. Should I spend 10 hours leveling up, or should I pay this scrupulous mage 1 hour of gold farming to boost me in Scarlet Monastery? Should I spend 2 hours farming 10 gold, or should I work an extra hour at work and just buy 30 gold? Should I lead this raid group of random players and just hope that the gear that I want drops? Or should I reserve items in the run to make leading this group worth my time? Players in the modern era just think of playing games differently. And again, I'm not saying this didn't exist back in the day, but it just feels like a lot more players played the game just because they loved playing the game back then. But now, more players attach a dollar and cents value proposition to the game. Which brings me to my last point, the economy. Because of that value proposition that we just talked about, buying gold in this game has completely taken over. There have been numerous videos on this subject, and I am fairly confident in saying that the gold buying black market for WoW is worth millions of real life dollars. And while the gold market existed back in the day, it's nowhere near as rampant as it is in the modern game. And a large reason for that is due to AI botting and the power of mages being able to solo farm dungeons with ease. Something that did exist in the original versions of the game, but is nowhere close to as widespread as it is now. The amount of raw gold injected into the economy is absolutely insane. Combine this with the fact that in-game rewards from non-mage farms have not kept up in value, you have a recipe for serious inflation in the market. And as a result, that value proposition of gold buying becomes extremely enticing. For example, in Season of Discovery, one of the easiest and quickest gold farms for a hunter is a Dire Maul tribute run. And if we're being generous, they will net you about 100 to 200 gold per hour and still requires a decent amount of skill to pull off. Or alternatively, you can go on this website and spend $6 plus tax on 1,000 gold right now. You don't have to be a genius to realize that that is a problem. And so, with all these problems that we know the game is going to have because we've already seen this story, we know how it ends. Why would anyone besides people that have something to gain or just really truly love the game be excited for the exact same rehashed, minimal changes, lazy re-release of a game that has already came out twice? A game that already exists as legacy servers. A game where absolutely none of the above issues that I laid out will be solved in any capacity. Why can't Blizzard release Classic WoW where raids are brand new and not just reimagined but completely redesigned? With new mechanics, new loot, a new look, a new experience, but they still maintain that classic WoW feel. It's not impossible. Look at OSRS, for example, that has continued to innovate the classic version of their game. Why can't the endgame in WoW be expanded on to include large successes from previous versions of the game, like Arena, like achievement points, like solo shuffle, like legendary quest lines? Why can't they fix the server so that large-scale PvP can actually be played instead of being a 2 frame per second lag fest? Why can't they implement systems so that world PvP isn't a grief fest? Why can't the game remove add-ons like weak ores that play the game for you? Why can't the modern WoW quest guide and the customizable interface be implemented into the classic version of the game so that players don't need add-ons for bare minimum quality of life adjustments? Why can't some classes get the small changes they need to not necessarily completely change the meta, but make them actually useful? Why can't leveling be just a little bit faster? Not so that players miss the magic of what makes vanilla WoW amazing, but so they can actually play at a decent pace. Why can't flight points be 50% faster? Why can't mounts be just 20% faster? Why can't we just remove world buffs or at least change how they work? They cause far more problems in the endgame, even though they're really freaking cool. Why can't we honor the integrity of the game by banning gold buyers and sellers both? Why can't Blizzard see all the bots in the game and remove them? Why can't we remove the ability for mages to solo farm entire dungeons and inject infinite gold into the economy? Why can't Blizzard just take what they've learned over the years and make a game that the community wants to play? And for all of that, I am frustrated with the announcement of a fresh classic. And I'm frustrated with Blizzard. You know, the hard thing, the ambitious thing, would have been to truly attempt to recreate the classic experience. Not merely by re-releasing the game as it was, but by innovating the game. Creating new challenges and systems that evoke the spirit of the original era, and build on lessons learned from all of these versions of the game, all the while making sure to not leave behind what makes the vintage era of WoW so great and memorable for so many people. And of course this is an impossible task, of course it's risky, and of course you can't just man that ship with any old game developer. You need people that love the game, you need people that are creative, and you need a concrete idea of not only what you're trying to do, but most importantly a plan on how to get there. Maybe Blizzard has come to know this already, that no matter what they do, they can't recreate a classic experience. Maybe players aren't looking to replay the game itself. Maybe they're actually seeking to relive a time in their lives that no longer exists. They're chasing a feeling, a moment that's just fundamentally gone. It calls to mind, you think you do, but you don't. However, Blizzard could take those steps to bring players closer to that ideal classic experience. Instead, though, they've chosen to repeatedly re-release the same game over and over again. They fall back on this cycle because it's easy and profitable. There's always someone who will look at a particular version of World of Warcraft and think, wow, that was a great time. I'd love to experience that again. And it seems like Blizzard knows this. The release of Kata, and what will be the release of Mists of Pandaria, and now the new era of, unironically, WoW Classic. All of these releases prove this idea, and from what I've seen, they will continue this lazy development cycle as long as players choose to keep allowing it to happen. You know, a wise man once said, WoW players love to eat shit. And unfortunately, for me, I think I'm full. I've been Java Monkey J. Thanks for watching. Peace.